Good afternoon, good morning, good night, depends upon where you are in this world. Welcome to this operations version of Humpday Hangout for Fire Engineering. Our topic, if you haven't figured it out yet, is going to be animals. And I think that every firefighter that spent any time in this profession, either as a volunteer or paid, has had experiences with animals. Some of them good, some of them rewarding, some of them greatly appreciated by the public, and some just really, really tragic, sad, and infuriating in some cases. I'm a captain with the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department, coming to you from our training division library and with the fire engineering books in the background. And before I introduce our participants or our panelists, I want to thank our sponsor, Key Hose. That's keyhose.com. Which I am a big proponent of because I use it every day as project manager with our standpipe hose project. Our department is almost exclusively Key Hose. It's not cheap, but I'm very proud that our department did not go cheap on hose because you don't want to go cheap on your lifeline. There's been a lot of talk lately about the pros and cons of using a Y. And the main reason we use a Y is to extend 1 3/4 line beyond the effective reach of pre-connects. Well, what is the effective reach of pre-connects? Well, a lot of that happens to do with your nozzle pressure, has to do with your target gallons per minute. But a huge factor in that is your friction loss. There's a friction loss across manufacturers and grades of hose is all across the chart. You get Key combat ready 1 3/4 hose, you're looking at a friction loss at 185 gallons a minute at 25 per 100 feet. So in many cases, we can just stretch a single line of 1 3/4 without having to stretch. We use a 3-inch trunk line connected to a Y. But low friction loss, great flow capability is just one of many selling points, great factors about the Key combat ready hose. But all the grades of Key hose are excellent. And at the midpoint, we'll talk a little bit more about their true ID 2.5-inch hose. So Sam, actually what we will do is, because we have a special guest, it will be talking on the topic of animals. I've asked my friend, Curtis Rice, retired battalion chief from Palm Beach County Fire Rescue, to participate. If you could tell a little bit more about yourself and your background in the fire service, Curtis, Chief Rice.
Sure. I was in the fire service for 33 years. I started out on a smaller department on the east coast of Florida, Hallandale. Stayed there for three and a half years, and then went up to one of the small fire districts in Palm Beach County that merged to become Palm Beach County Fire Rescue in 1984, and spent 30 years there with them. Lots of opportunities there as far as education. I've been able to attend FDIC quite a few years, and was lucky enough to be selected to instruct out there. Written some articles in Fire Engineering Magazine, some other periodicals. So it's been a fun ride.
Well, Curtis, we're going to ask about your experiences here with in command of a rather tragic fire involving several very expensive horses, polo ponies, from what I understand. And well, next, how about the second oldest guy in the group here, Captain Mike Dugan? Sir, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Mike Dugan, I'm a retired captain from the FDNY, and I heard we were talking about animals, so I invited my best friend to join us. So he's kind of sitting with me and just watching everything. He knows I'm in a chair, so he's going to be right next to me. He doesn't come down to the office much when I'm down in the office. So right now he's right here wanting as much love as he can get. And this is Clancy. He's a type of bulldog, and so we're just here going to be talking about animals, right? Right, buddy?
Well, Clancy and I got something in common here, Captain Mike, because I'm looking for all the love I can get as well. But I'm just not feeling it. So,
my daughter says, Bill, that she wishes her boyfriend looked at her the way the dog looks at me.
You better believe it. You better believe it. Just joined us from the Las Vegas area. This handsome guy with the mustache. That looks like it might be Clark Lamping. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself there, Captain Lamping?
Good morning, brothers and sisters. Captain Clark Lamping with the Clark County Fire Department here in Southern Nevada. I am on Las Vegas Boulevard, Firehouse 11, and first into Raider Stadium. I always got to say that. And I usually break Daryl Liggins' balls, but I don't think we should break his balls today. He's got his hands full with his family and everything. So if you're listening, Daryl, and anyone in Oakland and anyone in California, residents and firefighters, our thoughts are with you. Our thoughts are with you. You guys are up against the wall. And I've seen some video. I can't even wrap my head around fighting fire in those conditions. I can't even wrap my head around it. But as far as today's lecture goes, I did spend some time with FEMA. I'm on the task force, and we responded to Hurricane Katrina, and I saw some absolute breakdowns in animal rescue in Hurricane Katrina. Several years later, we responded to Colorado. FEMA changed the policy, and now we rescue animals, and there was a lot of breakdowns in that as well. So I can contribute. I think I can contribute something worthy in this conversation, no matter what Sam Hiddle has to say about me.
And what about Ryan? Is Ryan going to be on board here?
No, Ryan's in school today. Ryan's in school.
Oh, you're using Ryan's computer.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Actually, Ryan uses my computer, and he puts all this stuff on it, and I can't get it off. So
okay.
If pornography starts popping up, that is not me. I promise that is not me. He's 14 and he's really curious.
Sam Hiddle, tell a little bit about yourself.
Captain with Wichita Fire, and I don't plan on adding much to this. Most of my experience with animals is exactly what we were kind of talking about in pre-show. Just seeing the lack of care for them in certain neighborhoods of our response area. Just the neglect, which leads them to be a little more violent. And of course, trying to get that 360 when you have a dog that's trying to protect his territory.
Yes, yeah, and it is a problem. But Sam, you're going to bring something very interesting to the table, and you are quite the innovator. And we've got a little video that we're going to show. And it might be a good time, Sam. Before Sarah shows the video, can you tell us some of the situations where you would use this improvised snare?
Basically, this is one of those things. What do we say about experience? It's something you get right after you needed it. So what we had was a late night run to a barbecue joint. The guy pulled up, ordered his food, and then passed out. And he had an aggressive, violent dog in the vehicle with him. When we pulled up, we couldn't get inside the car to into this guy because the dog was protecting it, but they did have the window cracked. And so we were trying to get a rope around its neck so we could control it. But at the time, all we had was a rope. And so devices like what the video you're going to see is what we came up with in order to make a modified dog catch snare. This guy was out too. One of the things that amazed me is we pulled the rig within 5 feet of his driver's side window and blasted the air more than the guy didn't even.
Yeah, it's firefighters are just naturally compassionate people. I know of no firefighter that doesn't love animals, and we're going to talk about the element of risk. But the scenario that you just mentioned, the trying to treat a patient that has an overly protective dog, that's in the dog's mind or instinct is protecting the owner, is a perfect place for this type of tool. So would you explain before we show the video how you made this improvised snare?
Basically what you're going to see is the rope going through a ring on the hook, on a roof hook that we use to marry our Halligan to the roof hook. If you don't have that, you're going to want to wrap the rope a couple times around the shaft of the roof hook. But ultimately, you'll see we'll go down. We're going to make a knot. And one of the things you're going to see is measuring from tip to tip of the Halligan head on the roof hook. That gives us a pretty good measurement, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is get that knot to bite on itself, almost like a girth hitch, to keep the rope from pulling back through. And you'll see the rope move back and forth a little bit to show how that works. And then you're going to get to see my dog enticed by some cheese to show how it works.
Okay. Okay, great. Sarah, you want to show that video? And I think if we touch on it, it'll enlarge. There we go. Okay, Sarah, I think we're done. Sam, could you have Bruno come on and testify that there were no animals harmed or animals' feelings hurt during the production of that video?
When he gets back from the bed, we'll do just that. You are a sick man. You are. There's something wrong with that guy. Oh man, I got a million animal stories. So let me tell a happy one. Gonna call for a house fire New Year's Eve afternoon, like maybe 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. And in a Hispanic neighborhood. And I understand enough Spanish to know that the lady is screaming, my baby is in there, my baby is in there, my baby is in there. And I asked her, well, I'm on the engine, and we operate our medic units with an officer and 2 firefighters. So they're our rescue company. And I know I got the medic unit right behind us. So I'm asking her, ¿Donde incendio? And she says, en la cocina. So she's got a fire in the kitchen. Well, ¿Donde? And then she takes me to a side door. Now, I don't usually allow civilians to do the size up, but when it's obvious is the nose in front of your face, you're going to do it. There's your straight shot. Advise rescue that, the occupants are saying that there is a baby trapped. Well, the rescue put a heads up guy, and I hardly even knew the guy. He was working overtime, and he didn't go through that kitchen door. No way. He knew that in order to conduct a intelligent primary search, you're not going to start in the kitchen. You start at the front door, do a quick sweep around the door, and then head for the bedrooms. Down that hallway, the major means of egress. These guys went through that door like a friggin' rhinoceros. And they found the baby all right. It was a cute little dog, like a Pomeranian or a Shih Tzu or one of those. And guys, we have a kind of a tradition, a ritual on the Miami-Dade Fire Department is that several times a day we'll make ourselves that real strong espresso Cuban coffee. And we always toast somebody. And I said, here's the rescue too. I says, we're saving a child. And they look at me, what do you mean saving a child? I says, yeah. I says, you went about that with the same aggression, using the same skill, the same search techniques as you would for a child that would be hiding under a piece of furniture. And in the eyes of the homeowner, you saved their child. I says, it's not just a beloved family member. It is an expensive animal
And we've all been to fires where the outcome has not been good with pets, and it's a heartbreaker. So my animal story, and that kind of gets into my philosophy about why we will, to an extent, to an intelligent extent, exert a certain measured amount of risk to save an animal. So said that, Curtis, if you want to take the floor and let us know a little bit about, well, actually, you got the floor. You're our special guest. Let us know about your experience with the tragic fire in the stables.
Well, it was a Sunday afternoon, slightly after noontime, and I was the battalion next to the zone where this occurred, and happened to be working with our special operations battalion that day, who, interestingly enough, have a lot of training on large animal rescue, and they actually have straps and specific items for that. And it wasn't necessary in this instance, but we were wrapping up a training evolution they were doing, and the tones went off for the zone next door for a fire. So we're listening to it. Came in as I guess a smoke in the area type thing. So nothing really to be excited about, except that as soon as the officer pulled out of the bay, they probably weren't even on the street, he immediately struck a second alarm. So since I was going to be sent on the second alarm, I took off anyway. But I think in hindsight, that was one of the best things that happened to us that day, because what ultimately we had was a barn full of polo horses. The barn probably measured 75 by 100, and this polo ground is the oldest one in Florida, and this barn happened to be a fairly old barn, so it was a lot of dry wood, no sprinkler system, nothing like that. So help is going to be needed. I was able to jump on the turnpike, which is one of our major north-souths, and this actually ended up being the next exit below where I was, so I ended up being the second unit on scene. I should have been the second chief in, but you know, as it happened, I ended up being the first chief in. The initial engine company, God bless him, because he called that second alarm, we had a lot of help coming. So the thing that we had been talking about leading up to your program here is, you know, some of the preparation that you can have and some of the lessons learned. One of the things that I would tell people is, you know, what Gordon Graham teaches us: high risk, low frequency. A barn fire is a low frequency event, but when it involves horses, it's very high risk. A lot of money involved there. But it's no different than if you have an area that doesn't have rural. Maybe you have an industrial park. Maybe you have isolated industry like a lumber yard. You know, what's your access to that? What's your water supply? So those are the thoughts going through my head, because I was not familiar with this area. In fact, I didn't even know that polo ground existed, because it's right off the turnpike, right off a major east-west artery, tucked back in there. It's been there for a long, long time. So training goes a long way in preparation for that. But getting in there, we, again, you know, the fire gods were watching out for us in some respects on this fire. There actually was a polo match going on the grounds, so that the event was immediately noticed by all the people that were there. And being horse people, they went over to assist, which aided us greatly, because one of the things we learned, or that I learned, was that horses, their stall is their safe place. So a horse, even when the barn is on fire, will try to go back to the stall, or if they're in the stall, they don't want to leave the stall. So the fact that we had horse people on site that were able to help evacuate some of those horses out and keep them away from the burning barn was phenomenal. The first and then the other thing that helped too was one of our firefighter paramedics was working extra duty at that event, because polo, there aren't a lot of injuries, but it's a high risk thing. You're riding horses at high speed, swinging a mallet, you know, and so people do go down from time to time. So we have someone assigned there, and that firefighter was able to give us a size up of what was going on and a basic routing. But again, you're in a farm area, so how do you get there? Any of you listening that have a rural area, you know, it's not uncommon. I covered an area out by Lake Okeechobee that's very rural, and you might get a description to an address that says, you know, go about 4 miles till you get to the White House, make a left turn. When you get to the red barn, make another turn. Well, how does that work for assistance? And if you're the only one, you know, that knows where you're going, how does everyone find you? So one of the fortunate things was the people at the stables also knew that getting us there would be important. So we actually had people guiding us. They had the sense to have people strategically placed at turns to make sure that everyone gets in there. Because again, some of those places, you know, they might have a street name, but is that the name because the owner of the barn on that street lives there or has a place? So that's one of the things your local knowledge comes in handy. So we had the people playing polo on site that called it in immediately. We had a firefighter on site that was able to give us some size up and some directions. And we had people sending us in the correct direction. So herein lies another lesson learned. One of the things that people were yelling at us, but you can't really hear in an apparatus when you're coming by, is turn off the siren, because you're dealing with large animals. There are a lot of them around, and you come running in there code 3 with lights and sirens, you are going to cause another major problem. So fortunately, when I came in, people explained that to me, so I was able to get on the radio right away and tell them, when you get on the property, shut down the sirens. No sirens on the property. Because not only were we going to a barn on fire, we still had people that were at a polo match. They're moving their horses around. And if you're not familiar with a polo match, typically they play, you have 2 teams and you have 4 players. And they'll play, I guess it's about 7 or 8 chukkers, which would be the equivalent of innings. Each one of those chukkers, you use a different horse. So when you get to the elite level, for one match, you're using 8 to 10 horses per player. So you can see where these numbers are huge. And those things are all sidelined. So when you come blasting through there, flying down the road, blasting your air horns and sirens, you know, the outcome is not good. So we had a lot of help with that, which made it good. And then people were able to get some of the horses out. The tragic part was when our first engine got there, the barn was about 50% involved. The horses that 6 of the 7 horses, we ended up with 7 total that perished in the fire. 6 were in the barn. 1, I believe, died later at the vet's office. So one of the things I would tell you first off is learn what you can about this stuff. Practice, or not so much practice, but go out and visit these areas so you know where they are. If you're first or second due, what are you going to be dealing with? How's your access? Because for me going in there, the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, we're going into a real rural area with barns. How's that going to accommodate a full-size Class A pumper? How's that going to accommodate a truck company that's coming in? And again, fortunately for us, this is a high-use area, so there's horse trailers up and down those roads. It was all dirt roads, but we had no apparatus issues. And different from what I've seen in most places, most of the roads in there were double wide. I mean, you could have a vehicle going in each direction, which is very uncommon. Usually it's, you know, one lane of traffic, which would have really, really caused us some problems. So we had access that I was not counting on, but it worked out very well for us. The first engine company had access onto the property. There is one bridge that takes you across a very small canal onto the property. So he was able to get his apparatus out there and immediately start getting water on the fire to try and contain it, so we could determine if there are any more horses in the area or in the barn, more so. And then subsequently, we had a unit come in that the first in officer directed the second engine to get a water supply. And again, we were blessed because the barn was probably 75 foot away from the bridge. Right in front of that bridge was, like I said, that major roadway, and right across that road was a massive canal. So we are set up with drafting hoses on the truck, so getting a water supply for us was very easy. But therein lies another question. You know, is your department set up for this kind of thing? Captain Gustin and I just taught a officer development class for a city fire department. They have no rural area. And as such, they have the suction hose for their apparatus, but it's stored at one of the stations. So for their case, when the power went out during a hurricane and they had no water in the city, they also had no way to draft water. So if you have these kind of areas, make sure that you have the means to be able to get water, to be able to protect those horses and put the fire out. And as we're seeing, unfortunately, in California, one of the big things too is when you have a major fire like this, you're in a rural area, embers are going to go everywhere. We had a still day, which was thankful, but if that had been a typical 5 or 10 mile an hour prevailing wind, those embers would have gone up, and now downrange we would have had a hail of embers coming down, which could have triggered secondary fires like we're seeing in California right now. So that was another saving thing. So where's your water supply? Subsequently, we were able to get a good draft, and because he called a second alarm, we had tons of help coming, which we needed, because trying to hold the fire in check, we did a lot of work with 2.5 lines to get massive amounts of water on it to stop any progression of that fire, stop any extension. Because again, it's not only that fire. For us, the concern was, are we going to have airborne embers that are going to cause a problem? It was removed enough that the only exposure we had was on the Bravo side, was a double wide trailer that the caretaker lived in. But there was a gap between that and the barn, so that really wasn't a concern. It was more knock the fire down, be able to try and find out if there's any savable horses in there, but also at the same time stop any embers that is going to trigger a secondary fire for us. So all of that worked well. And you know, the unfortunate part was we had 7 horses that died. We had 4 of them that had to be removed from the property and taken to a vet immediately. 2 of them were in what the veterinarian described as critical condition. One of those subsequently ended up dying. And then the others also had burns on them. But because of the quick work of the horse owners that were on site, they were able to keep them away at a far point on the property, which again was a huge thing. So I think, you know, when Bill, when you were talking to me about this, the lessons learned are, you've got to get out and pre-plan these places. You've got to have a game plan. We were doing, and subsequent to this, we did a lot more of large animal rescue classes where they actually went with a veterinarian and they had horses on site so that they could learn how to deal with one. Because at one point, we had to bring those injured horses across the bridge, which was occupied. We had apparatus there, we had people there, and these horses are frightened, they're burned, but they have to be hand led out to the vet's trailer to move them on to the hospital. So how do you deal with that? You've got firefighters running around in full gear. You got radios screaming. Is that going to scare the horses? And if those horses get frightened and they're all around people, you know, so we've done, or my department, Palm Beach County Fire Rescue, has done a lot of work with training for an event like that, which goes miles, because if that comes up, you know, how do you get them out of there? And one of the things, Bill, that you had mentioned was, and it's a true fact, is the horses that when we got there were contained. But had they not been, the question was, how would we have wrestled those horses or contained them? Now, we just saw a great example of, again, an invention by necessity. What can you do with what you have to make a restraint to maybe work for a dog or a horse? Well, we have rope on the truck, so, you know, we could have improvised a girth hitch or something and probably put it around the horses. Because one of the things you'll learn quickly is all the tack and all the ropes and all the stuff that's used for horses is kept in the barn. So in the case of our fire, the arson investigators determined that an electrical short started. Unfortunately, it started at the end of the barn where all the hay is. And we all know how fast dry hay goes. We use that in our training burns and all of that. Well, when that went, you know, people ask, well, my God, how can a building be 50% involved by the time you get there when people saw the smoke instantly? Well, it's an old dried out building. It had tons of fuel. It's wide open, and it's not right around the corner from the firehouse. You know, driving down dirt roads still takes a little bit of time. But, you know, we were able to stop it at that point. Unfortunately, the death of the animals had already occurred, again, except for the one that went to the vet's office. So there really wasn't anything we could do there except make sure that we'd got all the animals out and contain it so that there's no extension anywhere else. So that was the big things. But, forward thinking is, if you and a horse come head to head, how are you going to control that horse? So having something, if you're a first in or second in engine, maybe some kind of loop already set up or some kind of tack available, because that's specific with what you do. And when we talk about lessons learned, Bill had brought up that thing about the tack, and that was one of the things we would have run into a problem with. On my department, one of the things they did for boat fires, forward thinking, was, well, if you ever had a boat fire, boats are tied to a dock with ropes. Well, what happens when the rope burns through and you put a hose stream on it? Well, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, whether you wanted to or not. You just launch that boat into the harbor or into another boat or something. So our crews that were by a marina came up with a very simple thing. It's a gaff with a section of chain on it with a rope tied on it. So when they throw it on the hook onto the boat, it's protected by chain, so the chain won't melt through. So they've learned what they need to do so they don't cause subsequent problems. Well, if you're dealing with horses or large animals, if you get something in there, if they'd have gotten there a lot earlier, how would they get those horses out? And once they do, how do you corral them? So forward thinking about how you want to detain or control those animals, that's some of the stuff that's taught in our large animal rescue class. And if you have these areas, it's one of those kind of things that you really need to look into.
Well, this goes right along with this. Just minutes before we went on online here, you don't see him. He's behind the scenes, but the real brains of these webcasts or these hangouts is Bill Carey. And he emailed us with an excellent tip. He says, one tip from my time when he was involved in an area that had stables is if you have your first due district has barns and stables, consider keeping some lead ropes on your rigs for the purpose of leading these. The other point he brought up is, and I saw that during my time of living in a somewhat of a rural area, a lot of horse handlers, groomers that will be sleeping in some of these unused, unoccupied stalls. So it is a life hazard as well. So I really want to thank Bill for that. You were spot on. We're at the 30-minute point. I want to talk about True ID hose by Key. It's a true 2.5-inch diameter. I have very limited experience with it, but what experience, as little as it is, I like it. I like it. And as firefighters, we know that 1/4 of an inch makes a huge difference in terms of weight, in terms of flow. And sometimes we reach the diminishing returns where bigger, greater diameter, greater flow is not always better. It's not always better, depending upon how many your critical rate of flow. But it's something definitely worth looking into. And if you're in the market for new hose, take a look at the True ID Key 2.5-inch hose. I was really pleasantly surprised. And I'm optimistic that it's going to be, it's going to make a big difference in the fire service. Sam, if you've got an animal story, I'd like to hear it. Make it a happy one, so we're all be in a good mood.
I don't have any happy ones.
Yeah, unfortunately, Sam, I hear you, brother. And we joke around, but I'm telling you, brother, it makes my blood boil. What I saw on that job, how terribly, terribly abused and neglected people can be to their pets, chaining them up with large chains in the backyard. We would get called by neighbors, and one of the tools that I use the most for animal-related calls is a set of mini bolt cutters. Dogs caught in barbed wire, chain link fences, and the like. So we would handle those types of calls. But you know, it's not always going to have a happy ending, unfortunately. And a lot of the animals that we did end up so-called rescuing have subsequently ended up being euthanized. Clark, you want to tell us a little bit about your experience, because there was a paradigm shift in FEMA's philosophy about animals and evacuating people, and why was there this shift?
Yes, sir, Cap. Like I said earlier, I responded to Hurricane Katrina with Nevada Task Force 1, and that was about in 2005. During that hurricane, FEMA had a policy that we, as in the task forces, we do not rescue pets. We rescue only people. So as that storm was hitting, before it hit and then it began to hit, they had teams going through these neighborhoods trying to evacuate people. And these people would come out, all right, I'm going. And the FEMA would tell them, you can't bring your animals. You have to leave the animals here. And the people said, I'm not leaving without my animals. Absolutely not. And the teams, I was there late. We didn't get there till about 2 weeks after the storm. But these initial teams could not convince these people to leave the hurricane area. They could not convince them to evacuate without their pets. So we show up 2 weeks later. We have to go house to house by boat now because the whole neighborhoods are flooded. We were working in an area called, I believe it's called Metari. And so we were going house to house looking for survivors. And what we found were dogs that were in the houses, still alive, eating their dead owners because the owners died and the pets were still alive. So that's what we were faced with. These people would rather die than leave their pets behind. Multiple times we saw that. We found dogs in the water, swimming in the water, animals all over the place. A lot of times we climbed into windows, like Sam said, face to face with a dog that hasn't eaten in 2 weeks. He's looking at me like I'm a T-bone steak. A couple times I jumped right out of windows onto rooftops. We had force protection with us. We had National Guardsmen with us, in the boats with us. And it was a small skiff, 4 rescuers in a boat and 1 National Guard. They had to kill multiple dogs. We were getting chased out of windows by multiple dogs. These dogs are crazy. Some people brought dogs back. Some people did put dogs in their boat, and then they put them back on our forward operating base, our FOB. And we had nothing to do. We didn't have any dog food. We were eating MREs ourselves. So we had these now feral dogs that were running around at our forward operating base. Nothing to do with them, nowhere to feed them. Couldn't get a hold of anyone. The roads were all washed out. No one's coming to get these pets. We had a victim. We had a body right there on the side of the highway, and someone before we showed up and put this body in a bag. And every day we drove to work, where we launched the boats, this bag was sitting there. Eventually, we had a gang of dogs, 20, 30 dogs roaming the area where we worked. And we came to work one day, the bag was ripped open, the body was gone. So these dogs were eating anything they could. Huge problem. I just couldn't believe someone would sacrifice their own life for their animal. So fast forward 2013, we had some real bad rains in Colorado. And it flooded out up in the mountains of Colorado outside of, can't remember the city, I'll think of it. Where Colorado State University is, the Rams. Fort Collins is up where Fort Collins is up in the hills there. They had these rains came through and they washed all the roads out, trapped all kinds of people in October. Well, winter's coming. These people couldn't get out of their houses. So by this time, FEMA came through and they said, okay, now FEMA saves all pets. We save all pets. So we were flying with helicopters into these neighborhoods and just rounding up all the people we could and telling these people, bring all your animals could come. All the animals could come. We were using Blackhawks. We were using the big Chinooks with the double propellers. And I remember one time I'm in the back of the Chinook and we're flying through the mountains and I'm looking down. There's 80 people, 80 civilians in the back of this Chinook. And it looked like Noah's Ark. There were dogs. There were cats. We had a pig. We had a pony on the goddamn helicopter. We had a little girl carrying a goldfish on a helicopter. It was like, I felt like Mr. Magoo. I had no idea what the hell was going on. So we're flying through, and a lot of these animals, they lived in the mountains, right? These animals had never been on a leash, had never been in a house, had never been to a veterinarian, all right? They're borderline feral domesticated pets, and now we have these animals who are in the back of a Blackhawk. Blackhawk is the noisiest piece of equipment on the planet, all right? If you don't believe anything else I say, do not put a feral cat in the back of a Blackhawk helicopter and expect that to go well for anybody on board at all. We might have lost a couple cats on that mission. So again, the moral of the story, so FEMA changed the policy and they really didn't give us much to back up, logistically to back this up. Now we were working on a National Guard base, and the National Guard base, they did have veterinarians staged right there. As soon as the helicopters would land, people went one way, animals went the other way, and the animals got immediate veterinary care, which was funny. A lot of times the veterinarians are saying this animal has never received any veterinarian care at all. They have no shots. They have no dental health, nothing like that. So it was just ridiculous. And one of the missions we flew, there was a woman who breeded rabbits. She was a rabbit breeder. And per the FEMA policy, she said, I want my rabbits to come with me. So we had to take a Chinook, and the pilot said it was over $10,000 worth of fuel. We flew this helicopter in her neighborhood, and we took 200 rabbits in cages and loaded this Chinook helicopter and then flew it back to the base. So I don't know what's right. It's just odd. Maybe the next natural disaster FEMA will sort out what we should be doing with animals, but I don't think we have it. I don't think we have it sorted out just yet.
Clark, I shudder to think of how many animals have perished in California. Captain Mike, I've got two questions for you, sir, because whenever we're talking about any type of operation, we always want to know, well, how does FDNY handle this? So I've got two questions for you, Mike. I'd like to hear your most memorable animal experience or a lesson learned, Mike. But then also, what is the FDNY's policy on things like cats in a tree? Those types of things. To what extent will you extend your resources and level of risk, Mike? So, two questions for you, Cap.
Okay, well, my most memorable animal story is I was a fireman up in Spanish Harlem and had a fire. It wasn't a bad fire, a little one-room fire in a building, and it was back in the the rubber boots and the three-quarter coats. And I went up on the roof, and because I was on the roof, I wasn't wearing the boots. I was just wearing my truck shoes to climb the ladder. I was just wearing regular leather boots, and I jumped off the ladder onto the roof of the building, and a German Shepherd bit my leg, and got a chunk through the legs. Ran downstairs and ran into an apartment, and I saw it. So we put the fire out, and I called the lieutenant, and I said, listen, I got bit by a dog. And the lieutenant says, you're kidding me. And he says, let me see. So I pulled my pant leg up, and I had teeth marks, puncture wounds in my leg. So we knock on the door, and an older Hispanic woman answers the door and says, no dog, no dog, no dog. I said, listen, look, the dog's in there. And they can hear the dog. So we end up having to get the cops there. And the cops are coming, and they say to the woman, do you have a license for the dog? And she brings out a license for the dog, and it was for a poodle registered on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Wasn't even her address. So the cops are going to go in there. They arrest the woman. They put her in handcuffs, and they're going in there they're going to have to dart the dog to find out what's going on. And I'll never forget, my lieutenant looked at me and goes, they come out of here with a little tiny Shih Tzu, you're putting in your paper because you're going to have to. And I said, okay. And they bring out a pretty good sized German Shepherd, and he bit me. So they ended up having him tested. He was fine. So I was good. But just very, very, dogs are interesting. I also worked in Crown Heights on a number of occasions. We had dogs tied to the gate around the front of the firehouse. And we couldn't get into the firehouse because of these dogs. These are dogs that have been used for bait in fighting operations. Now, the happy story on one of those is that one of the guys took in it. It was the most lovable dog in the world, and the guy still has it. It was a pit bull mix, and he still has the dog, and it's a beautiful, beautiful animal. Again, not all of them could be saved, but I think there's a special place in hell for the people who do this to animals. So those are some of my stories. We also have, I know in Brooklyn, I know in Manhattan, at least 2 stables in Brooklyn, at least 3 in Manhattan that I know of. So you have these in your area. You have to have multi-unit drill on these stables. They have to be entered into your critical information dispatch, our SID system. What you have to do, who you have to talk to, how many horses are in there, what you're going to do to these. Is it a sprinkler? Some of the newer ones are sprinklered. they are protected. But you have to know exactly what you're going to do. I mean, we have the carriage horses in Central Park. We have the police horses. We have the Black Cowboys in Brooklyn. We have the riding stable in Brooklyn. I mean, we have all of these places. You have to get familiar with the buildings in your area. As Curtis said, you got to know what's going on where you are. If you have stables, if you have a zoo. I mean, we have guys, their motto is first do at the zoo. They go to the Bronx Zoo. We didn't know until we had an issue that if you're going into an area with a zoo, the elephants are like the horses, and they don't like the sirens. We had an elephant almost kill one of its trainers when the fire companies came running in with the sirens on. And this was a trainer that the elephant loved. You get onto the zoo property, turn the sirens off. You know, things like that. So you have to go find out from the people who know these animals and know these places how you're going to handle them. Because, again, we want to make sure we take care of them. We all love our animals. I love my animals. But, again, I want my animals saved. But it's my dog, as much as I love him, is not worth the life of a fireman. But you have to know what animals are in, what you're going in there. And as you say, the guy going in there and rescuing the baby. How many times have firemen gone into places and said, you know, listen, it's a baby, and it turns out to be Fluffy and Snowball. You know, you never know. You never know. So you got to be aware of it. And see, when I talk about him, he comes right to say.
Yep. Yeah, he's a ham. Mike, Captain Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what is the FDNY's policy, either written or unwritten, in terms of commitment to, let's just use the cat. And by the way, I think most of us have looked at the web pages. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, there was a firefighter in Alabama that was called to help rescue a kitten that was behind a stove and he didn't get electrocuted to death, but it rendered him unconscious. And it says in the article that the firefighters performed CPR on him. Now he's up and around now, and cat and firefighter are fine, but not a good situation. But Mike, what is, if I do live in New York City and I have a cat in a tree, what is the policy?
There's no written policy. It's an assist the civilian. It's up to the officer to determine if it's, you know, is the cat truly stuck in the tree? Is there something going on? I have a very, very dear friend who I won't tell you who he is just because this story, but he was sent up a ladder to get a cat out of a tree. And he went up and he got the cat and he's grabbing the cat and the cat's scratching him and he drops the cat hits the ground, takes off running, runs around the corner under a fence, and there's a pit bull in the backyard. The cat does not survive.
Hey, Clark, is that necessary, for God's sake?
I can see that whole scenario playing out, and the guy's still on the ladder. Oh, and that was that.
That was that. And what do you tell the owner? I mean, we're here to help, and here's this poor woman whose cat this is, and the cat's gone. I don't want to be the guy who has to write that report. So you have to make the determination. It's up to the officer to make a determination what's going on and everything else. I mean, we are not trained to get cats out of trees. We don't have. Now I've seen Sam's little snare. That's a pretty good idea, but we don't have the tools to get these things out. And you get them out to the fireman, and they're scratching you. And I know my niece has 2 cats, and she had a fire in the adjoining condo next to hers. And they went to get the 2 cats, and they scratched the heck out of them. And my niece's husband ended up with the, what do they call it? Cat, the scratches ended up getting infected. I mean, he had a huge problem with this stuff. I don't want somebody to be off the rig for 3 or 4 weeks because they got attacked by a cat that was sitting up in a tree and just didn't want to be coming down.
You know, Captain Mike, if I can say this, and this is, you know, just from my experience, it's what you tell the people. There's a big difference between what did you call us for? We don't take cats out of tree to ma'am or little girl. Listen, I've seen a lot of cats in trees. First, I want to promise you, and I'm telling you the truth, that cats can jump from very high elevations, land on their feet, and be fine. And I want you to know that if we try to climb the tree, we could frighten the cat. The cat could fall, hit the fence on the way down, hit a branch. The best thing is, why don't we get some milk, or let's get some wet cat food. In other words, we really didn't do anything, but it was the way that we said it. And that's it's up to the officer in our department too. But a lot of times you'll leave without doing anything, but the public is satisfied that you at least showed them some respect and compassion and empathy.
And
that goes a long way.
The officer or the fireman who looks at a little girl and says, "Have you ever seen a cat skeleton in a tree?"
Yeah,
it's not gonna leave a good impression. You know, listen, your best bet, we could hurt the cat. We're gonna scare the cat. This cat doesn't know us. It's really not a good thing unless we can see it's visibly stuck. It's better off to leave that cat there.
Yes, and then explain it. Explain it. We've also had that problem with bees that take over of someone's attic. And if it's on private property, we don't handle it. And, you know, the first knee-jerk reaction is you're going to spray the bees with foam. You know, bees are can be a very valuable commodity, and it's the best. You're not going to spray every bee with foam and eradicate the bees. And I don't want to be in the bee eradication business. The only time that we would use a Class A foam on bees is the Africanized variety that are attacking people right then and now. And that's a rare event. You know, people think we're going to take care of that kind of problem, and we're not. But there again, we had printed up licensed beekeepers, and I would explain to these folks that unless you get that queen out of there, you're not going to get rid of the bee. So it needs to be done meticulously and humanely. Hey, we're just about ready to wrap this up. I'm going to start from one end to the other.
Cap Gustin, real quick, I have a question for Captain Dugan. That first due to the zoo, did that company give themselves that name, or those other companies branding that company that name?
I think other companies gave them that name, but they are first due to one of the zoos in New York City. There are a couple of different zoos in New York City. There are other companies that are called the zoo or the zoo, you know, and whatever else. But usually they get a name for a reason, but they are first due. And I mean, very honestly, they've had, the one I'm talking about is up in the Bronx. They've had good work in the primate house. You know, this is scary stuff because these animals are in there. And I mean, I remember going back, Clark, when I was a rookie police officer, we had to witness an autopsy to go on the street as a cop. And one of the people who was in the autopsy, when I was witnessing the autopsy, was a young lady killed by a tiger in the Bronx Zoo. She was a handler or a trainer or whatever else, and screwed up and kind of forgot her SOGs, and it got her, and she was laying on a table, and you could see where she was bitten in the back of the neck and the claw marks on her thigh, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, when we get complacent in all lines of work, linemen, firefighters, police officers, animal handlers. Chief Curtis, any closing thoughts? You're muted. You're muted, Chief.
Uh-oh, somebody muted.
There you go.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, fine.
Like Mike talked about, you know, you got to get out and you got to see what you've got. Some things that may help you that have helped me over my career. Don't forget your phone. Smartphones are can be a good thing or a bad thing, but usually you can bring up a satellite view of an area if you're going to somewhere you're not familiar with. You can find routings on that. You can see the streets, and you can also see water supplies, give you an idea of the size of buildings and exposures if you've never been there. When you go to these rural places, if you're the first truck in, whatever your apparatus is, and somebody's going to guide you in and drive you in, well, how are the rest of the crews going to get there? So you got to think about some way to make sure you lead people in. What kind of breadcrumbs are you going to use? We talked about the code 3 aspect. Anytime you're around big animals, you can't do that. It's just not going to work. What are you going to do for rehab for your personnel? And we talk about 360s. What about a drone? Drones are kind of a new thing to the fire service, but it gives you an aspect that you're not going to be able to get. We could not have driven around that barn that was on fire. Fortunately, we could see a pretty good amount of it, but there are other ones where you can't do that. So, you know, the smartphone is usually within about the last year. You got a picture of it. You can see the satellite view. If you have access to a drone, you know, those are the kind of things that to think about, you know. Before
Captain Mike, anything else? Are you there, Cap?
Yep, I just had to unmute, Bill. Yeah, the only thing is, it's like anything else in the fire service. It's pre-planning your area. If you have animals, if you have something unusual, pre-planning your area and knowing how you're going to do it, and going to the people who are the experts. If it's dealing with the animals, who are the trainers? Who are the people around that are training them? Get with them and find out what you need to know.
Yep. Thanks, Cap. Captain Lamping?
Yeah, I'd just like to expand on a little bit what you were talking about, Captain Gustin. You were talking about the compassion, treating people right, you know, cats in trees, not just cats in trees, all animal emergencies. No one on this panel is done running dead animal calls. There's no doubt in my mind. Just we as firefighters need to understand that these are family members of these our victims, all right? And it is important that we treat them with compassion and care. And I've been on a couple fires where goddamn person was breeding pit bulls, and the firemen are walking out of the house with dead pit bulls one after another and just tossing them in the front yard one after another. We had a pile of dead pit bulls in the front yard. People are hysterical in the yard, and I thought, oh man, this looks bad. Do what we can. Treat it like a human victim. Tell these people, I'm sorry for your loss, sir or ma'am. Your animal is dead. You know, just a little bit of compassion goes a long, long way. Long way.
It does. It really does. And those folks will remember really quickly. God rest his soul. One of the finest battalion chiefs I ever worked with. We had a fire in a single family home, and they had about 8 cats. And the family was not there at the time. And the chief told me, you stay on this fire. You stay on this fire. I don't care if it's for the rest of the shift. You stay on this fire until this family comes home. I do not want them to come home to see that their house had a fire and all their cats are dead. So you stay there. And it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And I shudder to think of what it would have been like for them just to drive up and see their house heavily damaged by fire and all in their family. What we ended up doing, we put the cats in the refrigerator, and as we would find them. And but the way we handled that, God rest his soul, he was such a compassionate chief. But I learned that lesson from him. Sam, any closing thoughts, sir?
I would just say when it comes to animals, predict unpredictability. You know, a lot of human nature we naturally respond to, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. We can anticipate when somebody's getting agitated. We can anticipate movements. Does that make sense? Whereas with animals, they are very unpredictable. Like the cat. One cat may come to you, another cat may jump out of a tree, and I think that's been expressed repeatedly in stories today. But I'm always intrigued. Dave Grossman, in his book on combat, when they want to teach people how to actually dress or load magazines under a true fear factor, they get the police dogs. They have the police dogs come down and try to chomp at them and get aggressive towards those people because the fear of animals is so instinctively strong.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Well, we're going to wrap this up for another month. Captain Mike, did you get my email about industrial fire response, plan emergency, fire protection, working cooperatively with plan emergency teams? We're hoping to have a couple of subject matter experts on. And the reason that I picked that topic for next month is I'm inspired. I was a student at the FM Global Industrial and Sprinkler Firefighting School in Rome, Georgia. And a shout out to those guys, Factory Mutual and Emergency Response Solutions. What a class act, a great program put on by FM Global. So, and the last thing I want to relate again is, you know, these poor firefighters that have got to be so mentally and physically exhausted, and to think that some of them either know or are very worried about their own homes while they're dealing with this terrible disaster in California. So our thoughts and prayers go out to all the firefighters that are operating on these horrific fires in California. I want to thank Key Hose. That's keyhose.com. I know I talk a lot about attack hose. But Key has a full line of larger diameter supply hose that we use here at our training division. And whenever you want to try out a piece of equipment, give it to the training division, because it'll be used every day, dragged across the pavement and used and abused by our recruits. And that's the true test of a piece of fire equipment, is giving it to your recruit training. So take a look at Key Hose, and don't forget that they make some fine, large diameter supply hose as well. Till next month, I'm Bill Gustin, and Sam Hiddle, Clark Lamping, Captain Mike, and our special guest, Chief Kirk. Thank you so much, and for all of you, may God bless you and keep us all safe in our most noble profession.
And happy Thanksgiving, one and all.
There you go. Thank you, Captain Mike.